Those of us in the scientific community regard evolution as the only theory that ties the diverse discipline of biology into a meaningful whole. The theory of evolution is as important for the biological sciences as the atomic theory is for the physical sciences.
There is an increasing number of scientists, both men and women, in science who are moving away from the acceptance of broad-scale evolution. One of the reasons certainly is that the evidence for the individual is just not convincing. But I'm convinced that creation is the only intelligent, rational position with regard to origin questions.
This is the Ray County Courthouse in Dayton, Tennessee. In this courthouse, 56 years ago, the famous Scopes trial was conducted. It came to be known later as the monkey trial. A school teacher was being tried for teaching evolution against the law in the state of Tennessee at that time. It really developed into a debate between two prominent Americans, Clarence Darragh, a criminal lawyer from Chicago, an agnostic who did not believe in scientific or biblical creation, and William Jennings Bryan, an orator who 3 times ran for president of the United States. He was a fundamentalist Christian who believed in scientific, in biblical creation. It was quite a debate. Today, we're talking about the debate that is going on between scientific creation, biblical creation, versus evolution. Stay tuned.
From Liberty Mountain in Lynchburg, Virginia, the following program is a special presentation of the Old Time Gospel Hour. Now, here is the moderator for this evening's Creation versus Evolution debate, Dr. Jerry Falwell.
Good evening. Since mankind came into existence, he has asked such questions as, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? The origin of species, where did I come from, has been another question that man has debated for nearly as long as he has been asking those philosophical questions. In fact, the answers to those questions determine not only how men and women view themselves, but how they view others as well. Some religious people have felt that science is the enemy of religion. Some scientists have believed that religion is the enemy of science. Both camps have erected a high wall between them. I believe both sides have been wrong. Religion and science, rightly understood, are not enemies. In fact, rightly understood, they complement each other. The purpose of tonight's debate is to begin to tear down that wall. Anyone who knows anything about me is aware of my belief that the issue of special creation versus evolution is the foundational premise for all truth. I hold to the view of biblical creation because I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, and I accept totally the Genesis account of creation. Millions of persons hold to that position. However, there are millions of persons who do not believe in scientific creation. They accept various theories of evolution. And tonight we have one scientist who holds to the evolution view of man. Those who believe in special creation have been greatly disturbed that in many public schools, evolution has been taught as fact. To compound the problem, many educators and some media personalities have maintained publicly that there is no scientific evidence to support the concept of special creation. They have maintained that special creation is merely a religious philosophy and is not supportable in the arena of science. Therefore, the Old Time Gospel Hour proposed earlier this year that a nationally televised debate should be conducted between 2 eminent scientists who hold opposite viewpoints on the origin of species. Let me now introduce the participants in tonight's debate. First, from the Department of Chemistry at the University of California, San Diego, Dr. Russell F. Doolittle. Dr. Doolittle will argue the evolution theory. Next, from the Institute for Creation Research, also in San Diego, Dr. Dwayne Gish. Gentlemen, welcome to Liberty Mountain and to Lynchburg, Virginia. The ground rules for tonight's debate are as follows. Each gentleman will have 18 minutes to make a position statement, then 5 minutes for rebuttal, and then 2 minutes for summary. We request that all applause be held until each speaker concludes his remarks. By the toss of a coin, it has been determined that Dr. Doolittle will speak first. Dr. Doolittle.
I'm here this evening against the advice of many of my colleagues. They have pointed out to me that this is a no-win situation, that in fact, how can you come into the home of the old-time gospel hour and really hope to convince anyone of the factual nature of evolution? They point out also that it's impossible for anyone in 15 minutes to outline the tremendous amount of data and information that leads to the concept of evolution. They point out that this is a very different debate than kinds of debate I may have had with Dr. Gish on other occasions. It's not the same as going over to the student cafeteria and exchanging a few words here and there, skirmishing a bit about this or that. That in fact this is an enormous media event witnessed by millions of people perhaps, and that what it will amount to is really publicity for a special cause. They point out that I'm really a stage prop here, just sort of a necessary fixture, and that there's no way that I could convince anybody to change their mind about this particular view. Now, of course, they're right, and the question comes up, why in the world am I here tonight? And I'll tell you that the reason I'm here tonight is that I really am a concerned citizen, and I'm worried about the future of education in America. I'm very much worried about what has happened during this past year in Arkansas and Louisiana, where in fact the state legislatures have seen fit to award the equal time teaching of creation and creation science in the science curriculum. To me, this is a travesty. Even though, of course, being way out there on the frontier in California, I perhaps might not have been moved to be some sort of carpetbagger and come all the way out here to Lynchburg and do it, if it hadn't been that, in fact, various things going on in the state of California also have moved me to my concern. There was a poll that appeared last May showing that, in fact, half the people in California wouldn't mind if, in fact, equal time were given to the teaching of creation alongside of evolution. Now, this seems so alien to me, that as evolution is a part of science, whereas creation and so-called creation science is a religion, and our country was founded on this principle of keeping the two separate, it just seems so strange that I felt I must come here and speak out. Now, in California, something else happened last year, the events of which moved me very much to come here and try to be a spokesman in speaking in opposition to people who call themselves creation scientists. These events occurred in Livermore, California. About a year ago, parents found that their children were coming home from the 5th and 6th grade of a particular school and were telling their parents stories about science class that smacked very much of fundamentalist religion. And in fact, after it went through a period where various committees were faced with the traditional dilemma of teacher freedom versus what's going on in the classroom, it was found that a teacher had taken it upon himself to introduce creation science teaching in the classroom in Livermore, California, without any mandate from the people who lived in that community. In fact, when this committee went in and inspected, they found that it was a virtual propaganda campaign that was nothing short of indoctrination. They found that there were 8 different film strips with accompanying cassettes, audio. They had 8 different audio cassettes besides, 6 hardbound books, 24 paperback books, 8 pamphlets, 40 copies of 8 different newspapers, all bearing the creationist stamp. The overwhelming majority of these materials emanated from the creation press, when I got the name here someplace and got it wrong, but it's Dr. Gish's institution. It is the Creation Life Publishers that are an arm of Christian Heritage College, the home base of the Institute of Creation Research. Some of these materials contain such statements as, "Evolution is the best tool Satan has to destroy the minds of young people." There were many of them, and in fact, I thought about this debate tonight. I thought the best way for me to make my point, not necessarily with the people here in Lynchburg, but with the heart of America that I hope will have some sense about this, is to read from these materials to show what you're getting into if you want to follow Mr. Falwell's advice about putting creation science into the curriculum. Why, most of these materials were authored by Drs. Gish, Drs. Morris, Mr. Parker, and Bliss, and I'd like to use them now to just tell you what it was that so upset me. I'm going to start with one particular one called Dry Bones, probably familiar to many of you in the audience. Dry Bones is purportedly an article or a book about fossils. And what it's supposed to do is show, in fact, how the fossil record can be interpreted in terms of creation, special creation. This book is in the form of a dialogue between a father and his two young children, David and Diane, and its message is to explain how the fossils are just a natural result of the great Noah flood, Noah and his ark, all about 3,000 years ago or several thousand years ago. Let me just read to you a few passages. Diane has just inquired about a fossil snail that David had found, and her father has just explained that it was drowned when Noah's flood covered the earth. I'm going to start with a further father talking here. He says, here's another picture of another extinct creature, Diane. Do you know what it is? She says, of course, it's a dinosaur. Did dinosaurs live when Noah lived, Dad? And that's what I think, he says. The way it looks, dinosaurs were drowned in the flood, too. Besides, what did we see on our camping trip last summer? Do you remember the Paluxy River near Glen Rose, Texas? Oh, yes, we saw footprints of man and dinosaur together. I guess man and dinosaur had to live together if they could make footprints at the same time. Now, in fact, folks, I have to just tell you that the Paluxy human footprints with dinosaur footprints ranks among the greatest frauds of our time. The locals down in Texas simply carve them in among the dinosaur tracks to sell to the tourists. Now, the thing that is most astounding to me is that, in fact, the creationists well know this, and on occasion they will even admit it, even in print once or twice. But there is Dry Bones still out there in the classroom, and it even recommends a film down the bottom here, Footprints in Stone, that follows the same line, available from the Films for Christ. Let me continue. I want to go on with the dinosaur business here. By the way, Dad, if dinosaurs were alive when the flood came, did Noah have to take them in the ark? He surely did. God told Noah to take at least one pair of all the dry land animals. So here we have now dinosaurs, which of course were extinct long before mankind appeared on the earth, going off in Noah's ark, in this particular book being used in the 5th and 6th class grades at a Livermore public school last year. He went on. They confirmed that the reason that Noah had to have this flood, because he had to make these animals extinct because our sins made the world so bad. And so it goes on in this little book. I'd like to continue one more because now we want to get into the case of what does it have to do with science and evolution. It says now, Dad, you were telling me that the fossils were probably things drowned in the flood, right? Yes, Dave. He's talking to Dave now. And so the fossils were alive at Noah's time and are probably only a few thousand years old, right? Right. Well, my friend who told me about evolution showed me a book. It said that fossils are millions of years old. He said you could prove it with uranium dating. If you use uranium to date fossil rocks, Father said, sometimes, bold print, you do get ages in millions of years. But did your friend also tell you about scientists at Oak Ridge National Lab? No, what about them, Dad? They used uranium dating on wood, in rocks of the dinosaur group, and got ages of only thousands of years. Now, quite apart from the fact that there's no uranium in wood, I'd like to know what those Oak Ridge scientists had in mind. I'd like you Oak Ridge people to write in and tell me, come clean now. How is it that, in fact, you think those dinosaur prints are only a few thousand years old? That's hokum. I think that the only thing that we can ever say is that any implication that dinosaurs lived a few thousand years ago is sheer gobbledygook. Now, going on to read one last passage here, since I think it really makes my case. I guess uranium isn't proof after all, is it? I don't think it is, Dad says. But don't just take my word for it, David. You read what the Bible says. Study science for yourself when you get older. I want to know that you think for your own good reasons. You know, Dad, I was just thinking, if there isn't really any proof of evolution, why do people believe it? Like that Dr. Doolittle fellow. Not because of the fossils, Dad says, that's for sure. The fossils go along with creation. But I can tell you why I once believed in evolution. And now, capital letters, you believed in evolution, Dad. Yes, I did, David. This is like the Confession of St. Augustine here. I even taught it in college for 7 years. Really? Why did you believe in evolution, Dad? I thought, bold print, I believed it because of all the evidence. I really believed it because I didn't believe in God. I'd like to read that passage again, because as far as I'm concerned, that's why we're here tonight, and that's what this debate is all about. I thought I believed it because of all the evidence. I really believed it because I didn't believe in God. And as I interpret that, it says, if you only consider the evidence, then you'll accept evolution. But it's only when you go to the mystical and the supernatural that you find yourself forced to deny it. Of course, I could be accused of some vivid reading here and taking things out of context. After all, you know where I come from. So let me read you a letter from a citizen in Livermore. It happens to be an open letter. It's from Dr. Edward Teller. Dr. Edward Teller is a famous atomic physicist, father of the you-know-what, and not usually known as a reflex liberal, and I'd like to read a few lines. He wrote about dry bones after he saw it. He said, dry bones, whose use in the public schools in Livermore, etc., dinosaurs are seen lying restfully in Noah's Ark. He says, as a fantasy, this is charming, and many a child will love to see it, but it is not presented as a fairy tale. The book advocates the strict literal interpretation of biblical creation. It misrepresents science, Darwinism, and the modern method of establishing dates of past events using radioactive substances, though this method has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. That's an open letter from Dr. Edward Teller. Now, there were many, many other things in this science classroom that were extraordinary. There was one about learning about the sun. So there's a film strip. I have the strip that goes with the film strip with me. It says, I'm the sun, 93 million miles away from you folks down there. My intelligent creator designed me to make a lot of different things happen from way up here. This is in the 5th and 6th grade classroom, Livermore, California, fall 1980. Another one down here. Did you notice your Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees? Our creator did this on purpose. It goes on. This mentions creator over and over and over again during this and sets the whole solar system as though an intelligent creator system had just gone out and done it in one day. All right, there were many, many more. There's the handy-dandy evolution refuter. I have a checkout list showing that many children were taking that one out. Dry bones and others going along. Dinosaurs, those terrible lizards by Dr. Gish. Many others. But now that I've told you why I'm here, now I'm going to move into what I consider to be the strong evidence for evolution. But all of that was to say that I'm concerned when materials of that sort are introduced in a classroom in what nothing short of a blitzkrieg to put one narrow point of view before people. With that, I'd like to start my own little slideshow here and quickly go through some of the evidence that I feel most favors a natural evolution of all life on this earth. Now, if I may see the first slide, I think it's going to, it's over here on my left. It shows that, first of all, that there are many, many different fields that contribute to evolution. I'm only going to stress a few this evening, but they cover every aspect of science can be brought to bear, and it's all self-consistent. That's where its major strength comes, that everything adds up for everything else. And furthermore, it not only has to do with life on this earth, we could bring in astronomy to this picture, and on my second slide, I'll show you a picture of the galaxy Andromeda. This galaxy is, in fact, 2 million light years away. We ourselves are in a similar galaxy, the Milky Way, stretching so far across that it takes light almost 100,000 years to get from one side of our galaxy to another. Well, any place, I would contend, that life occurs in either of those galaxies or any other one, it's going to evolve in the same way that we've seen it evolve here on this Earth. The next slide is just going to hurriedly introduce a little roughage, you might say, for the talk to show you that, in fact, there are a lot of molecules that occur out there in interstellar space besides the stars. I'd like to especially emphasize that many molecules made up of the small atoms, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, the kind of which living things are made, occur out there in open space, including things like ammonia and water. And there's one up there on the list in particular, HCN, that's hydrogen cyanide, very key molecule for life, and I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. But it's on the next slide now that I want to just stay and dote for a while. This gives some ages, and I think that here is one of the two fundamental things I'm going to try to emphasize during the course of my short talk here. One is how old the universe is and the Earth There's a very big distinction between people who accept evolution and those who want to go with a special creation account. That's one. Then secondly, after that, I'm going to switch to the man-ape-like ancestry business, taking the two most important ones here and cutting out all the in-between stuff, even though that's an enormous amount. All right, well, according to the principles that I accept, our universe is something of the order of 15 billion years old. There are a number of ways of estimating this age, having to do with how big the universe is and how fast it's expanding and so on. But I want to go quickly now to the Earth. The Earth should be in here on this list at something of the order of 4.6 times 10 to the ninth, that is to say 4.6 billion years old. I think that almost all scientists agree that that's its age. And I want to tell you how they know that. They got it first by radio dating meteorites. They used three different methods, not just one. They used the uranium decay series to lead as one principal way that can be used. They used another one using the elements potassium and argon. They used another one using rubidium and strontium. And all three of these gave the same age. Now, what they were dating here were meteorites. And the assumption at that time was that meteorites, which are formed out in the outer reaches of our solar system, or presumably at the time that the solar system was formed, are an example of what the Earth might have been like in terms of its age when it was formed. Now, clearly, the surface of the Earth is weathered during all this time, and it's very hard to find rocks that are still in that pristine condition to give those old ages. The oldest rocks are only something of the order of 3 or 4 billion years old. On the other hand, the big confirmation of all this came when our astronauts actually went to the moon, and they brought back those moon rocks. And they brought those moon rocks back, and they were dated in the laboratory, and zingo, right on, 4.6 times 10 to the ninth, the exact same age as meteorites, the same age that all scientists that were seriously involved in this thought the Earth was. Now, at this point, I have to ask, because I feel this is so important, I'm going to try and pin Dr. Gish tonight down to tell me how old he thinks the Earth is. He doesn't like to come up with hard numbers on this in my previous experience, but I'm hoping America will be watching to see if he'll give us a number. And the reason is that creationists like to be a little slippery about this. There are some of them that like a very small number, a few will stretch it a little bit. For example, I have here a quote from Jerry Falwell, his famous Penthouse magazine interview, Penthouse, March 1981, no applause, page 151. Falwell said, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. If you read the first 3 chapters of Genesis carefully, there's a very clear, unlimited time span there. It could have been millions of years. Could have been hundreds of millions of years." Now, that's Jerry Falwell's view about all this. I want to hear Dr. Gish say tonight how old he thinks. 30 seconds. I'm running out of time. It's incredible. All right. Well, I have to quickly go here. May I, in fact, quickly now just go through my slides. I just thought what I think is a 30-second flash here. These have been the fastest 18 minutes of my life. And if I'm now on my last slide, I've been squeezed out. My last slide just went by. I'm out of gas, and I think that...
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Doolittle, but your time is up, and thank you. And now with his initial statement from the Institute of Creation Research, Dr. Dwayne Gish.
Thank you, Dr. Falwell, Dr. Doolittle, ladies and gentlemen. There are 2 fundamentally different explanations for the origin of the universe and of the living things it contains. According to the theory of evolution, or as we should more properly call it, the evolution model, everything in our universe has come into being through mechanistic processes which are ascribed to properties inherent in matter. No supernatural intervention of any kind was involved. In fact, by definition, God is excluded. Thus, while not all evolutionists are atheists, the theory of evolution is an atheistic theory. According to this theory, all living things have arisen from a single one-cell organism, which in turn had arisen from a dead, inanimate world. This theory may be called the general theory of evolution, the particles-to-people theory, or as I sometimes call it, the fish-to-gish theory of evolution. On the other hand, after 120 years of Darwinism a rapidly growing number of scientists have become convinced that natural laws and processes absolutely exclude the possibility that the universe could have created itself, and that the best available evidence demonstrates that living things could not, and in fact did not, arise from lower forms. These scientists have become convinced that the concept of creation is a much more credible explanation of the evidence related to origins. According to the concept of creation, or as it may be called, the creation model, the origin of the universe and all living forms came into being through the design, purpose, and deliberate acts of a supernatural creator. The creator, using spatial processes not operating today, created the stars, our solar system, and all basic types of plants and animals. Although there were no human witnesses to any of these events, creation can be inferred by the normal methods of science, observation, and logic, just as surely as we can all tell the difference between a pebble formed by natural processes and an arrowhead created with plan and purpose. Let us now dispense once and for all with the notion that this is a debate between science and religion. Each concept of origins is equally scientific and each is equally religious. In fact, neither qualifies as a scientific theory. The first requirement of science is observation. Obviously, there were no human observers to the origin of the universe, the origin of life, or as a matter of fact, to the origin of a single living thing. These events were unique, unrepeatable, historical events of the past. Furthermore, even if evolution were occurring at the present time, it would require hundreds of thousands of years to produce the kind of change needed to document evolution. Ultimately, then, no theory of origins can be considered a scientific theory in a strict sense. Creation and evolution are inferences based on circumstantial evidence, and predictions based on each model can be tested and compared with that circumstantial evidence. Among creationists are found those of almost all religious persuasions, except atheists. And among evolutionists are found those of almost all persuasions, including atheists. However, since evolution is a mechanistic, atheistic theory, it is a basic dogma of agnosticism, humanism, and atheism in general. The one-sided indoctrination of our students in this materialistic philosophy, in the tax-supported public schools, in our pluralistic democratic society, is a violation of academic and religious freedoms. Furthermore, it is poor science and poor education. To remedy this intolerable situation, creation scientists are asking that, excluding the use of the Bible or religious literature of any kind, only the scientific evidence that can be adduced in favor of creation and evolution be presented thoroughly and fairly in our public schools. After students have had an opportunity to examine all the data, consider each alternative, and to weigh the implications and consequences of each position, then they should be challenged to decide for themselves which is more credible or reasonable. Now that is good education in the finest traditions of academic freedom. Now let us consider the available scientific evidence. According to the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe, about 10 to 20 billion years ago, all the energy and matter of this entire universe were crammed into a cosmic egg of subatomic particles and radiation. Of course, no one has the foggiest notion where this cosmic egg came from or how it got there. Zap! There it was. Then, for some equally inexplicable reason, this cosmic egg exploded. And out of this initial chaos, our marvelously complex universe somehow created itself. A relatively short time after this explosion, we are told, the universe consisted of an expanding cloud of hydrogen with a minor amount of helium. The late Professor Harlow Shapley of Harvard University stated that some people piously proclaim in the beginning God. I say in the beginning hydrogen. He went on to say that starting with hydrogen, natural laws and time, one could explain the origin of the universe. Of course, he could do no such thing, but the idea was consistent with his philosophy. This reminds me that someone has said that hydrogen is an odorless, tasteless, invisible gas which, if given enough time, becomes people. And of course, that is exactly what evolutionists do believe. According to evolution theory, then, disorder spontaneously generated order. Complexity arose from simplicity. Chaos created the cosmos, all by a process of self-transformation. According to this theory, the universe is an isolated system which began in a state of disorder and spontaneously transformed itself into the present highly ordered and complex universe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that idea, that notion, is directly contradicted by the second law of thermodynamics. According to this law of science, an isolated system, that is, a system on which no work is being performed by an outside agency, and a system into which no energy is being brought in from the outside, can only become more disordered with time, never more ordered. Such a system will constantly become more random, more disorderly. That is a natural law of this universe. Flying directly in the face of this natural law, evolutionists persist in believing that this universe is an isolated system which started in a state of disorder and transformed itself into a highly ordered and complex state. Creation scientists reject this totally anti-scientific notion. Furthermore, they asked, by what means of tortured logic can one assume that the very same processes and principles which are now leading towards destruction of this universe could also have been responsible for its origin in the first place? To believe that this universe created itself naturally is irrational and unscientific. And if it could not have created itself naturally, then it had to be created supernaturally. If evolutionists really believe in science, they would abandon their faith in the God of evolution. Now let us consider the laws of probability, also a fundamental law of science. Every living cell on this earth, whether bacterial or human, is indescribably complex, marvelously coordinated in time and space, and exhibits purposefulness in every detail of its structure and function. The human body has about 30 trillion cells of over 200 varieties, 12 billion of which are found in a 3-pound human brain. In the brain, there are at least 120 trillion connections, the most incredibly complex arrangement of matter in the universe. The evolutionists would have us believe that this marvelously designed and unbelievably complex human body and millions of other equally complex plants and animals were produced through millions of random chance mistakes or mutations. Evolutionist Lauren Isley, for example, declared that man is a long chain of DNA accidents taking place over billions of years. Carl Sagan was quoted in Time magazine as saying that only through the deaths of an immense number of slightly maladapted organisms are we, brains and all, here today. Creation scientists point out that when this notion is examined in the light of information theory and the laws of probability, that notion is simply preposterous. And we are finding an increasing number of scientists and mathematicians who, even though they are evolutionists, are saying the same thing. You just cannot generate even a single bacterial cell by such chance processes in 5 billion years, or 500 billion years as far as that's concerned, let alone the millions of complex species that now exist. Even at the molecular level, evolution is impossible. Most proteins consist of several hundred amino acids, each arranged in precise sequence. And DNA and RNA usually consist of thousands of nucleotides, also arranged in precise order. The number of different possible ways these subunits can be arranged is so incredibly astronomical that it is literally impossible for a single molecule of protein or DNA to have been generated by chance in 5 billion years. For example, calculations by Dr. Hubert P. Yockey, based on information theory, demonstrated that the most one could get by chance in 1 billion years is one single gene sufficient to code for a protein of only 49 amino acids. Of course, that's light years short of what would be required for the most primitive cell imaginable. Why, even to have the remotest chance of getting life started, we would have to have billions of tons each of hundreds of different protein molecules and billions of tons each of hundreds, if not thousands, of different DNA and RNA molecules. Here in my hand, I have a newspaper article published August the 14th, 1981 in the Daily Express of London. The headlines say, "When two skeptical scientists put their heads together and reach an amazing conclusion, there must be a God." Who are these two atheists, or I should say ex-atheists? None other than the famous British astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle and Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe, a mathematician and astronomer. These two scientists, working independently, calculated the mathematical probability of life starting spontaneously by some evolutionary process, taking the entire universe into account. They were astounded. They couldn't believe their results. The probability turned out to be zero, nil. They each then concluded that life had to be created, and therefore there must be a God. Now, how could anyone ignore these conclusions, reached no less than by these two hard-nosed atheists, or I should say, again, ex-atheists? Ladies and gentlemen, based on the proved principles of chemical thermodynamics and kinetics, information theory, and the laws of probability, we can say that a mechanistic evolutionary origin of life is simply impossible. Earlier, I referred to evolution as the fish to Gish theory. Now, in this context, I think we should call it the too little to do little theory of evolution. What about the fossil record? In that record, do we find gradual change from simple to complex demanded by evolution? Are museums overflowing with vast numbers of the transitional forms that should have been found if evolution is true? Well, our museums do contain millions of fossils, including those of over 250,000 different species. The available fossil record is much more than adequate to document evolution if true. However, what we find in the fossil record is not what is predicted based on evolution. We have not found what we were told to look for ever since Darwin. The missing links are still missing. What we do find is a sudden explosive appearance of a great variety of highly complex forms of life for which we have never found ancestors. Furthermore, we find that each basic type of plant and animal has appeared fully formed with no evidence of gradual change. No evidence of intermediate or transitional forms are found. This is precisely the evidence predicted on the basis of creation. Let us hear what some evolutionists have admitted about the fossil record. Dr. Corner, a Cambridge botanist, stated in a book published in 1961 that, quote, "Much evidence can be adduced in favor of evolution, but I still think that to the unprejudiced, the fossil record of plants is in favor of creation." In an article published in the journal Evolution in 1974, Dr. David Kitts of the University of Oklahoma said, quote, "Despite the bright promise that paleontology, that is the fossil record, provides a means of seeing evolution, it has presented some nasty difficulties for evolutionists, the most notorious of which is the presence of gaps in the fossil record. Evolution requires intermediate forms between species, and paleontology does not provide them." End of quote. But what about Lucy, an ape that Donald Johanson claims walked upright just like man, and therefore, he says, should be placed at the base of the human family, an intermediate between ape and man? Since Johanson describes this creature as totally ape from the neck up, the only basis for the idea that this creature was a link between man and ape is the notion that it did walk upright. But did it really walk upright like you and I? Johanson says that his Lucy is the earliest and most primitive of a group of creatures whose scientific name is Australopithecus. But studies on supposedly more recent forms of Australopithecus by Lord Zuckerman, a famous British anatomist, and by Dr. Charles Oxnard, professor at the University of Southern California, convinced them that these creatures did not walk upright like man and that they were not intermediate between ape and man. In fact, in his book, Beyond the Ivory Tower, published in 1970, Lord Zuckerman states that if man evolved from an ape-like creature, he didn't leave a trace of that evolution in the fossil record. And while we're on this subject, we should remind ourselves of the famous Piltdown man that stood for nearly 50 years as a human ancestor until shown to be a hoax, constructed from a modern ape's jaw and a modern human skull. And Nebraska man, another creature hailed as an evolutionary ancestor of man that turned out to be nothing more than a pig's tooth. Finally, evolutionists believe that some hairy, four-legged mammal that may have resembled a pig, cow, or buffalo evolved into whales, dolphins, and other marine mammals. One of our creation scientists, Luther Sunderland, has attempted to visualize what these intermediates may have looked like. We see that on the screen. Now, my challenge to Dr. Doolittle and to all other evolutionists is this: if you don't like these suggestions, what are yours? When we come right down to any concrete case like this example, we see that the whole idea of evolution is absurd. Spatial creation is far more credible, far more reasonable. Dr. Shapley gave us two choices: in the beginning God, or in the beginning hydrogen. I say that the overwhelming mass of the scientific evidence demands in the beginning God. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gish. Thank you, Dr. Gish. And now, with his rebuttal, Dr. Doolittle.
Dr. Gish continues with more of his illogical logic. If it can't be explained right now, then obviously if it can't be explained by natural causes, it must be supernatural. I have two rebuffs to this to start with. The first place, if it has to be supernatural, why only the Christian one? Why not all these non-Christian explanations that have been with us for centuries? It always seems to be that it only has to be his supernatural one. Secondly, just because we can't explain something now doesn't mean we won't be able to explain it in the future. Look at the last 100 years. We have discovered the world of the very small, the world of the very large. We've discovered viruses, bacteria, all these things. The whole notion of DNA and how it gets together in its self-assembly process is something we've only been on to for about 30 years now. So I think that there's no doubt that we will explain all this, any of the questions that he's raised, to everyone's satisfaction eventually. The question is whether we have to put everything on hold and go through a lot of mumbo-jumbo in the interim. Let me take some specifics. His thermodynamic one. Now, Dr. Gish raises this thermodynamic argument no matter where he goes. I'd like to take a page from his book and read from his own fellows. I'm reading now from Dr. J.A. Kramer, professor of physics at Wheaton, Illinois College, an acknowledged creationist. This isn't an evolutionist now. This is one of you, creationists. He says, if we are to believe that general evolution contradicts the second law, we must also conclude that all living organisms continually violate the law. He suggests that creationists stick to things that they are more competent in. Now, with regard to this fellow Yockey and his paper, Dr. Gish raised this last year in a debate with me. I hadn't read the paper before. This time I've read it. It is shot through with errors and misassumptions. In fact, it is, as I've explained to Dr. Gish many times, the earliest proteins were undoubtedly very simple and small. They weren't the size of the ones that they always take for their examples. They got bigger by a process of gene duplication, biochemical Xerox I usually refer to it as. They were inefficient at the beginning. They got better. There's been plenty of time. That's why the age of the Earth is so important to the evolutionary argument. I'm still waiting to hear this evening when Dr. Gish tells us how old, in his view, the Earth is. Now, besides these things, and when it comes to this business about thermodynamics, probability, and so on, I have to say that either Dr. Gish understands, he refuses to understand, or he can't understand, and it's not for me to decide which tonight. Now, the thing that I am most concerned about here in this business about what view should pertain if you in fact find that evolution is offensive to your religion, to me that is a problem. I understand that you could have something very near and dear to you. I mean, after all, who wants to tell a child that Santa Claus doesn't exist or something of that sort? I can understand that it would be very sensitive if you believed a certain thing and you found your daughter or son being taught something differently in school. Now, I would reiterate that evolution is a scientific concept. It is completely secular. It has nothing to do with religion. It doesn't say anything about what you want to believe in that regard. Now, the analogy I would make is, should we not teach, for example, in the public schools, hygiene? Suppose we should say that we should not say, as we know, that germs cause disease. The reason we shouldn't say that germs cause disease, viruses, bacteria, etc., is because some religions don't accept that. Should we therefore say we have to give equal time to people who don't believe that? It would be absurd. Should we teach or not teach that the earth is a globe? There are people, mostly on religious grounds, more fundamental than these people here, I would tell you, that believe the earth is flat. There are still flat earthers, and they find it in their rendering of the Bible where they say that the four corners of the earth are referred to there. You don't find four corners when you have a sphere. Should we not teach that just because some religions don't? No, I say keep religions separate. Now I'd like to get on to this business that I missed in my main rendition about the ape-like ancestor in man, because this is in fact what it has all now gets people most aroused. Jerry Falwell, for example, in that quote I started to read earlier, said he wouldn't mind if in fact the earth were 100 million years old, as long as nobody starts to claim that man came from an ancestor that resembled apes. Now, of course, man did come from an ancestor that resembled apes, and we can prove it in many different ways. There are no gaps in the molecular fossil record. There's a complete set of transitional forms. And I can make this point, I think, very clearly to you. If you were going to go in and have a transplant, kidney, for example, you know that you go to the doctor, if you're a person these days who is any sort of current and would care about your health, and you had to have a transplant, you would certainly prefer to have that from an identical twin. If you don't have an identical twin, the doctor would say, well, do you have a fraternal twin? The reason is that your molecules, your molecular constitution is more similar when you are, in fact, coming from either an egg or an egg fertilized in the same womb. Or if you can't have that, a sibling of any sort would do, or a parent. And then after that, maybe a first cousin. Well, everybody appreciates that as you get further and further away in ancestry, the molecules become more different. Well, the same picture emerges when you compare all the molecules...
Dr. Doolittle, but your time is up.
Oh.
And now, with his rebuttal, Dr. Duane Gish.
Well, unfortunately, Dr. Doolittle wasted much of his time talking about the situation in the Livermore School District. What that teacher did, he used books which included reference to the Bible and material like that, which we have no intention of putting in the public schools. As a matter of fact, the material that we have prepared for public schools have been very carefully edited to remove any references to the Bible or religious literature of any kind. So all of that discussion had nothing to do with the discussion this evening. As a matter of fact, this is supposed to be a debate on the scientific evidence related to origins, you see, creation and evolution, not what some teacher may have done in Livermore, California. Now, I'm surprised that Dr. Doolittle doesn't know the difference between living organisms and a dead, inanimate world, or our universe. You see, of course we can exist, living things can exist, because we are living organisms. We have marvelous machinery. We can take in food, and we can use that food, you see. But our universe was an isolated system. You didn't bring anything into the universe, you see. You didn't have any means like that. Let me give you another example. You know that automobiles don't usually run uphill. They usually run downhill. Well, you can get an automobile to go uphill, but you don't just bring in a can of gasoline and pour the gasoline over the car and light a match. That won't make it go uphill, it just goes up in smoke. What do you do if you want to get that car to go uphill? You have to take the gasoline, which is chemical energy, put it in your gas tank, which is fed into the motor. What does the motor do? It converts that chemical energy into mechanical energy. Now the car will go uphill. So you have to have an energy conversion machine. And of course you have to have somebody driving the automobile. If you don't have anybody driving the automobile, it doesn't go uphill, runs off into the ditch. You see, you have to satisfy certain conditions. You have to have an energy conversion machine and a proper control. On the hypothetical primordial Earth, you did not have an energy conversion machine. You had no control system. And the idea that life could have spontaneously generated itself, contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, is not science, ladies and gentlemen. That is blind faith. Now, Dr. Doolittle has mentioned the age of the Earth. Now, concerning the age of the Earth, of course, evolutionists have no choice. They must believe in a very old Earth, since evolution demands an immensity of time. This debate is not about the time of origins, however, but about the how of origins. These are separate questions. In fact, some creationists agree with Dr. Doolittle that things seem quite old, while other creationists cite a large number of physical time clocks that indicate that the solar system and the universe must be quite young. Yet both groups of scientists agree that the scientific data demands creation. Dr. Doolittle has referred to the coalified wood. How could you date wood with uranium? The uranium is an intrusion into the coalified wood. The uranium is there, no problem. He mentions these Paluxy River tracks. Ladies and gentlemen, there were a few tracks carved during the Depression. When they ran out of tracks, didn't have any more to sell, they carved a few. But that doesn't mean that the tracks that have been uncovered in recent years in under a bank and so forth, they can't be carved. These aren't carved, these are genuine tracks. And so they are valid evidences there for at least the coexistence of man tracks with dinosaur tracks. And he referred to a statement by Dr. Parker. I know Dr. Parker personally, he's my colleague. Dr. Parker, for a while after he became a Christian, was an evolutionist. It wasn't that, but his pursuit of the scientific evidence convinced him as a scientist that evolution cannot be true and that creation is a better explanation. Now, Dr. Doolittle has referred to meteorites and the moon, and you always get the right age. He didn't mention the fact that when they dated the moon rock, they got ages of all kinds, from almost a few thousand to many multiplied billions of years. They simply selected the date that had to be right, which had to be 4.6, you see, 4.6 billion. The trouble with these dating systems, there's too much picking and choosing. That's what I say about it. It's simply not a scientific method. But again, I reiterate, that is not the question here tonight. How did things come about, creation or evolution? I say the scientific evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gish. And now, with his summary, Dr. Doolittle.
Still no age of the Earth in numbers there. I think that I don't know whether NASA's been lying to the president. Maybe the president ought to call up NASA and say, how old are those moon rocks? All right, summation. All living things, as we know them today, I would contend, are related through an enormous family tree. You through your parents, your grandparents, your great-parents, and as reprehensible as it may seem to you, all the way back to bacteria. You have enzymes floating around in your system that can be shown unequivocally to have amino acid sequences that resemble those that occur in bacteria. They could not possibly come about by chance in any possible way. In contrast, I find creation science is a pseudoscience. It distorts, it misrepresents, we've seen it tonight, it ignores facts, it's based on a narrow religious dogmatism. To put it in the science classroom, I believe, is to handicap America. It's to cheat our children. For only by an understanding of the logic of evolution are we going to understand the problems that we face as a civilization today. Mankind, if he doesn't understand evolution, cannot understand ecology. He cannot understand how we're drowning in this earth from an overpopulation and overexploitation of resources. To ignore these facts, I would contend, is to live a life of pretense and will certainly lead us on the road down to a dinosaur-like extinction. Therefore, I naturally favor the view of evolution. I know that it is the only explanation for our being here tonight.
Thank you. And now Dr. Gish with his summary.
Ladies and gentlemen, 3 or 4 centuries ago, the notion that the sun and other planets revolved around the earth was the dogma of the scientific establishment. And Galileo faced determined opposition from fellow astronomers when he suggested otherwise. Louis Pasteur and others, about a century ago, overturned the established dogma of centuries when they showed that living things never arise spontaneously from dead matter. Today, even though thousands of scientists are creationists and the number is growing rapidly, the notion of evolution remains a stifling dogma. Evolutionists seek to smother all challenges from within or without the scientific and educational establishments, concealing the fallacies and weaknesses of the theory and adamantly opposing a hearing for the scientific case for creation. Why is this so? Certainly not because the notion of evolution is science and the concept of creation is religion. I can think of two possibilities. First, it may be that evolutionists consider that our students are too ignorant, too illiterate to be exposed to these competing ideas of origins. They must be protected from error and carefully indoctrinated in correct ideas by those who consider themselves to be the intellectual elite, the sole possessors of truth. Secondly, having engendered this fragile tower of hypotheses piled on hypotheses where fact and fiction intermingle in an inextricable confusion, it may be that evolutionists are aware of the fact that the notion of evolution will fare badly if exposed to an open and determined challenge from creation scientists, and that if this is done, the majority of our students will accept creation as the better of the two concepts of origins. Whatever may be the case, it is urgent that our students be exposed to all of the evidence, all of the arguments on each side of this question, so that these two alternative concepts of origins, creation and evolution, can compete freely in the marketplace of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russell Doolittle of the University of California, San Diego, and Dr. Dwayne Gish of the Institute for Creation Research, San Diego, for being with us tonight for this most important debate. You have just witnessed a 1-hour nationally televised debate on one of the most important controversies of our time, scientific creation versus evolution. No 1-hour debate on such an important and involved topic could be complete. Our purpose is to whet your appetite, to encourage you to investigate the subject at greater length for yourself, in your personal reading, in your research, in school, at the library, and to help you do that and to assist you in remembering what you've heard in this debate. I would like to offer you a full transcript of this debate between Dr. Doolittle and Dr. Gish. We'll mail it to you free if you will simply dial the toll-free number now on your screen. Please include your name, address, and proper zip code. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope this debate has proved beneficial to you. It certainly has to me. I'm Jerry Falwell. Thank you for watching, and good night.
The preceding program has been paid for by the Old Time Gospel Hour in Lynchburg, Virginia. To receive a complimentary transcript of this evening's debate, simply write to Jerry Falwell, Lynchburg, Virginia, 24514. Again, that address is Jerry Falwell, Lynchburg, Virginia, 24514. Be sure to include your name, address, and proper zip code. Now, this is John Corrigan, thanking you for watching this special program. Remember to watch the Old Time Gospel Hour weekly in your area.